Yes.
Can you? Okay, great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jane, as well, for this good introduction, for inviting me to speak. It is wonderful to see many familiar faces, the friends that I've gained when I was a missionary at the 1000, affiliated with the 1000 Missionary Movement, and also when I was a teacher at the Estee Language Institute. Okay, so good evening to all of you who are on my side of the world, and also good morning, my buntag. Anyong hashimnika, salamat pagi, salamat sabat to those who are in Asia and other places where it is morning over there. I'd like to start my talk by asking this question: does mental health have any bearing on our spirituality? So we've heard the story before. Elijah, a very formidable and powerful prophet of the Lord, has just won an overwhelming victory against the prophets of King Ahab, or more accurately, the prophets of false god Baal, in one of the most spectacular events ever recorded in the Bible, the so-called showdown at Mount Carmel. I call the victory overwhelming and something that Elijah didn't have to work hard for, because while the prophets of Baal had to cry out all day, jump around on the altar that they built, and cut themselves with swords and spears in order for their God to send fire from heaven and consume the bull that they have sacrificed, Elijah simply prayed to God, and immediately lightning struck the altar he built, and the bull, the wood, and everything around it was completely consumed. That day, Elijah proved to the people that the God he serves, not Baal, is the only true God. Surely, Elijah couldn't be any happier that day. He may have felt very confident about the power of God to do wonders and to fulfill his will. He may have felt very happy and pleased, contented and fulfilled as God's messenger. But whatever he felt during that day, those feelings were just short-lived. Enters Queen Jezebel, the wife of King Ahab, who was enraged by what she heard about what happened at Mount Carmel, and sent a messenger to Elijah to tell him that she will do whatever it takes just to kill the prophet. So when Elijah heard this, when he heard this, formidable prophet Elijah suddenly became helpless and afraid. Powerful prophet Elijah, whose prayer to bring fire from heaven God heard, and who proclaimed that God would send rain again to drought-stricken Israel, seemed to forget about God's marvelous power. He became powerless and ran from the city of Jezreel all the way to Beersheba, about 100 miles south. After the exhilaration of the mighty battle and witnessing God sending fire from heaven to consume the sacrifice, Elijah's emotions came crashing down. And all he could see was a major disconnect between what his faith told him about God and the circumstances that appeared that Queen Jezebel was in control. He was so discouraged, depressed, and felt like a failure. He was so disheartened that he just wanted to lie down and die. But we can't blame Elijah for the feelings that he showed during that time. In James 5, verse 17, we are told that Elijah was just a human being, subject to like passions as we are. If you can feel defeated and depressed, why can't Elijah? Now try to put yourself on Elijah's shoes. He had just fought his great spiritual battle against his nation's idol worship, standing alone as one man against hundreds of Baal's prophets. Afterwards, he outrun a chariot and a 16-mile journey to Jezreel. He had not slept properly. He must have also been exhausted emotionally and spiritually. He was vulnerable to the devil's attack, and the word of Jezebel hit him hard like an arrow, piercing his heart and spreading poison. Elijah was completely knocked out, so he felt afraid, devastated, and ran away. Now, going over the scientific literature, I've read some writers argue that Elijah showed some of the symptoms of depression. Now, according to the DSM-5, which is the psychiatrist Bible for the diagnosis of psychiatric disorders, depression is a medical condition characterized by depressed mood and or loss of interest or pleasure, feelings of guilt or low self-worth, disturbed sleep or appetite, feelings of tiredness, poor concentration, and thoughts of death, or suicide. Now in 1 Kings 19, verse 4, it says there that Elijah just wanted to die. Social isolation is also one of the associated features of depression, which Elijah also showed, as written in 1 Kings 19, verse 4. But he, Elijah himself, went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a tree. Now, although the argument that Elijah succumbed to depression is controversial, what seems to be established is that from being a very confident and courageous prophet, Elijah became afraid. From being powerful and faithful, he became powerless and faithless. After hearing that Jezebel is so keen about taking his life, Elijah ran away. He lost his faith in God, became depressed and discouraged, and eventually wanted to die. Now, going back to my first question, does mental health have a bearing on our spirituality? So how would you answer that question in view of the experiences of Elijah? But then it leads to the second question. Did God ever leave him at that state? How did God deal with poor, desperate, and depressed Elijah? Did God say, "Oh, faithless Elijah, how long shall I suffer with you? Why are you downcast? Why are you afraid? Get up, coward, go and fight." Did he ever say these demoralizing words while Elijah suffered? Now, nowhere in 1 Kings 19 can we read those words. Instead, God provided some interventions to help relieve so-called depressive symptoms of Elijah. Interventions which science of today has uncovered the basis for how they work. And the first intervention is found in 1 Kings 19, verse 5, which says, "Then as he lay and slept under a broom tree, an angel touched him and said to him, 'Arise and eat.'" Now, it is easy to think that the first intervention was food after reading the phrase, "arise and eat." But if we look at verse 5 very closely and we go a few words back, the first intervention was actually touch. An angel came and touched Elijah. But why touch? Because the Lord knows that touch is essential for healing, because it is an integral part of human interaction. Touch, when we hug or feel a friendly touch on our skin, actually activates a specific part of the brain, and it may influence thought processes, reactions, and physiological responses. Now, one part of the brain affected by effective or loving touch is the orbitofrontal cortex, which is involved in emotional and social behavior, as well as learning and decision-making. Touch can also be calming and reassuring for people experiencing distress. Hand-holding or hugging results in a decrease of the stress hormone cortisol, which buffers the effects of stressful responses. Now, here is an even interesting fact. Affectionate, appropriate touch also releases oxytocin in the brain, which is a chemical involved in increasing positive feel-good sensations of trust, emotional bonding, and social connection. Oxytocin also decreases fear and anxiety responses. Now, do you know what oxytocin is affectionately called or known as? It is the cuddle hormone. Now, for mothers who have just given birth, one of the things that doctors suggest that they do to ensure healthy development of the newborn baby is to affectionately touch their child. Recent studies showed that touch actually is good for the brain development of babies and can protect infants, even those who were born to mothers who suffered from depression. Now, Jesus has also used touch a number of times to treat people while here on earth. He intentionally used tactile methods like hugging a leper, placing his hands on a crippled woman's spine in most of his healing miracles. The Great Controversy, page 25, says that Jesus kindly received the sick, and disease and approaching death fled at a touch of his hand. So whether it's a warm embrace, a reassuring hand on the shoulder, or one arm linked to another, physical contact is therapeutic. And touch is all the more important as we continue to live amidst the pandemic. We all know that the pandemic has placed restrictions on physical contact, on touch, due to social distancing imposed by many societies. We can even no longer shake the hand of our brother and sister and while we greet them happy Sabbath, because that could lead to the spread of COVID-19. So how do we prevent ourselves from experiencing the so-called touch starvation, which is so common nowadays? How can we use touch to help someone who may have developed depressive symptoms because of social isolation? Now, while nothing can wholly replace the benefits of positive human touch, virtual alternatives can help alleviate the effects of touch starvation. Even online chat, whether through FaceTime or Zoom, can be an alternative to physical touch because it allows us to see each other. In fact, video chatting is about 80% as effective as in-person contact, according to one research. Singing, also in lieu of touch, or other activities that is another activity that increases the release of oxytocin in the brain. And caring for pets, touching them is also therapeutic during stressful times. Now, going back to our story, the Lord's touch upon Elijah through the angel was like the gentle touch of a mother upon her young son. Afterwards, the angel then commanded Elijah to eat. Elijah looked around, and there, by his head, he saw a cake of bread baked over hot coals in a jar of water. The second intervention that God provided was nutrition. Notice that the angel prepared hot food and not cold bread or rice. The meal that he prepared was not only delicious, but also nutritious. There was also a jar of water. And we all know very well the impacts of nutritious food on our health and healing. And current evidence suggests that healthy eating patterns that meet food-based dietary recommendations and nutrient requirements can assist in the prevention and treatment of depression and anxiety. Yes, you heard it right. Healthy eating patterns that meet food-based dietary recommendations. And a good example of this one is the Mediterranean diet, which emphasizes seafood like fish, olive oil, vegetables, fruits, nuts, lean protein sources, whole grains, and vegetable oils, and limit nutrient-poor, energy-dense foods high in added sugars and saturated fats, including sugar-sweetened beverages, pastries, and refined grains. A recent study reported that a certain type of Mediterranean diet reduced depressive symptoms of people given this type of intervention over the 12-week period compared with those who were exposed to social support only. Pastries, of course, do not constitute a large part of the Mediterranean diet, but I have a strong feeling that the bread offered to Elijah by the angel was not high in sugar or saturated fats. Now, another type of diet which has been found to improve depressive symptoms is the DASH diet, which is short for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. Now, the DASH diet is rich in fruits, vegetables, and low-fat dairy, and low in saturated fats. Now, going back to the Mediterranean diet, if we look at John 21, what did Jesus prepare to cheer his disciples up when they were on the verge of giving up on their life mission? Verse 12 says, Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." None of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Verse 13 continues, Jesus came, took the bread and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. So Jesus cooked a hearty breakfast for them, composed of fish and bread, and spoke kindly to them, restoring his loving relationship with them. Then he renewed their mission, saying, "Feed my sheep." So far, we've covered two interventions that God provided to help ease the depressive symptoms of Elijah. Let's now discuss the third one, which is found in 1 Kings 19, verse 6. Then he looked, and there by his head was a cake baked on coals and a jar of water. So he ate and drank and lay down again. The third intervention was, in fact, sleep. Now, why didn't God wake Elijah up after he has eaten his meal? God allowed Elijah to sleep again because God knew that he needed rest and renewal. And God knew that sleep is also therapeutic. Now, why is sleep essential for depression? First of all, I wanted to clarify that sleeping too much, a condition called hypersomnia, is also associated with depressive illnesses. Contrastingly, some people who are depressed may also find it difficult to fall and stay asleep. Disturbance of the normal sleep-wake mechanism is also a feature in depressed individuals. Poor sleep may provoke depression in some people. Regardless, sleep is generally therapeutic. Otherwise, we would not be spending about a third of our lifetime sleeping if it was not good for our body. So if you've taken some anatomy and physiology classes, in the center of the brain, there is a gland called the pineal gland, which secretes a hormone called melatonin as night falls. Now, melatonin modulates wake-sleep patterns. The duration of melatonin secretion each day is directly proportional to the length of the night. And guess what is needed to make melatonin? It is serotonin, a brain chemical that makes you feel good, which stabilizes your mood and feeling of well-being. Serotonin is also one of those brain chemicals that is enhanced by many antidepressant medications. Together, melatonin and serotonin affect us not only physiologically, but also psychologically. Now, a teacher from pharmacology and has spent a lot of time talking about the benefits of sleep. Sleep is therapeutic and restorative. When we do not get enough sleep, we do not feel good and our reasoning is affected. So the third intervention was sleep. But of course, too much sleep is bad. Look at verse 7. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." Verses 8, 9, which covers the fourth intervention, says, "So he got up and ate and drank, and strengthened by the food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God." So can you guess what is the fourth intervention? If you said exercise, you are correct. So when Elijah was instructed to arise, to get up, and he had to move. Now, if you do not call 40 days and 40 nights of walking exercise, tell me what is. Similar to sleep, lots of studies have proven the positive impact of exercise on mental health. Exercise also produces a hormone that food does not produce. And these are the endorphins, sometimes called the happy hormones. Exercise also has the capacity to decrease stress levels. Now, one interesting finding that you may or may not have heard about is that exercise actually helps in making new brain cells, even during adulthood, and this has been shown in animals. Yes, in animals such as mice who had been asked to exercise. Now, one of the areas of the brain where these new brain cells are created is the hippocampus, which is involved in storing memories and is strongly affected by depression. The theory is that exercise makes new neurons in the hippocampus, and this may help with memory while improving mood and depressive symptoms. So touch, nutrition, sleep, exercise, is that everything? Did it end there? Now, the final intervention, which is also so interesting, you don't want to miss it, is found in 1 Kings 19, from verses 9 to 13. And the story continues. There he went into a cave and spent the night. And the word of the Lord came to him. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He replied, "I've been zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with a sword. I am the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too." The Lord said, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak all over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. I hope that you've caught the fifth intervention, which is gentle whisper. And notice that after hearing this gentle whisper from the Lord, Elijah wrapped his face in his mantle, opened up about his depressed feelings and anxious thoughts to God, which we can read in verse 14, and was then eager to continue his missionary work, to follow the command of God to go through the wilderness of Damascus and anoint Hazael as new king of Syria, Jehu as king of Israel, and Elisha as his successor. But why not earthquake and wind and fire? Why gentle whisper? Of course, God used mighty earthquakes, winds, and fire before to deal with the wicked enemies of Israelites. God spoke to Job and his friends through a storm, especially when Job's friends thought that they had Job's miserable life figured out. But for fragile Elijah, God did not use earthquake, wind, or fire, but a gentle whisper. I like how a certain writer put it this way. If God would have appeared out of the wind, the fire, or the earthquake, I think that would have overwhelmed Elijah in his fragile condition. What he needed at that moment was a calming reassurance of God's presence. God knew this, and he met him in that manner. Now, other translations call gentle whisper as the still small voice. When God speaks to your heart, this is often how it happens. Not the loud thunder or the powerful earthquakes, but a gentle whisper of a still small voice. In a manuscript titled The Gentle Whisper of God, the author of this manuscript wrote, "The Lord called Elijah in a gentle whisper, 'Elijah, Elijah.' To hear God's voice, Elijah had to give full attention. Otherwise, he would miss it. Elijah had to listen for God's voice with a humble mind and with a quiet and gentle heart. By manifesting in a gentle whisper, God met Elijah's brokenness with tenderness, which is often what he does with us. And if I may add, this is what we also should do whenever we deal with a brother or a sister who has been depressed. Now, the topic of mental health and depression is so dear to me. I had a first-hand encounter with depression by having a sister who suffered from it when she was in college. I was in my final year in elementary school in the Philippines when this happened. Now, if you think that depression is not real and it does not affect both body and mind, you are entirely wrong. I really saw how depression turned my sister into another person, fearful and anxious, and didn't know how to care for herself. I also saw how it turned us into different persons in the eyes of my sister. To her, we were just strangers who were constantly around her during the times that she suffered from it. Now, her case was something that resulted from a series of unfaithful events that during her college years that made her so much worried and depressed. Oh, how the condition really changed her thoughts and perceptions. Thankfully, after intensive treatment, she was healed and she had never been admitted to the hospital again for depression. She graduated with flying colors in college and is now an educator at an Adventist school in the Philippines, a strong woman with 4 kids, married to an Adventist pastor and literature evangelist, ministry leader. Now, somehow my passion for neuropharmacology has been influenced in part by this firsthand experience with depression and my unquenchable thirst for knowledge about how the brain works and how it could be changed by interventions such as medications. I'm currently teaching neuropharmacology and conducting research in this field, and I have also been an advocate for mental health disorders. Last year, in light of the reported mental health effects of COVID-19, I organized a workshop titled Filipino Family Wellness, How to Help Your Child Tackle Life's Toughest Challenges. The workshop was led by Dr. Joyce Javier, a Filipino doctor who works and teaches at the University of Southern California, who has been doing research and helping Filipino communities in Southern California deal with teen suicide and depression. Did you know that Filipino youths are especially vulnerable to depression and anxiety, especially those young people who have just moved to the US from the Philippines? Now, one day, while preparing the materials for my class on antidepressant drugs, I came across a wonderful story about an unconventional method to treat depression. Yes, an unconventional method because it does not use drugs. And this story happened in Cambodia as told by South African psychiatrist Derek Sommerfeld and told by Johan Hari. Let me read to you the story. So in the early days of the 21st century, Dr. Sommerfeld went to Cambodia at the time when antidepressants were first being introduced there. He began to explain the concepts to the doctors that he met. The doctors listened patiently and then told him they didn't need these new antidepressants because they already had antidepressants that work. Dr. Sommerfeld assumed that they were talking about some kind of herbal remedy or some potions. Dr. Sommerfeld asked him to explain further, and they told him about a rice farmer they knew whose left leg was blown off by a landmine. He was fitted with a new limb, but he felt constantly anxious about the future and was filled with despair. The doctors sat with him and talked through his troubles. They realized that even with his new artificial limb, his old job working in the rice paddies was leaving him constantly stressed and in physical pain, and that was making him just want to stop living. So they had an idea. They believed that if he became a dairy farmer, he could live differently. So they bought him a cow. In the months and years that followed, his life changed. His depression, which had been profound, went away. You see, doctor, they told him, the cow was an antidepressant. So while some people believe that depression is some faulty wiring within a person's brain, there are some others who believe that when you're depressed, you are not weak, crazy, and you're not a machine with broken parts. In the words of Johann Hari, you're just a human being with unmet needs. It is just as important to think here about what those Cambodian doctors are not saying. They did not say to this farmer, hey buddy, you need to pull yourself together. It is your job to figure out and fix this problem on your own. On the contrary, what they said is, we're here as a group to pull together with you. So together we can figure out and fix this problem. This is what every depressed person needs. And it's what every depressed person deserves. Drugs do give some relief to people, but precisely because depression goes deeper than their biology, the solutions need to go much deeper too. And it's only when we truly address the deeper underlying reasons that we're going to begin to see the liberating, nourishing, and deeper solutions, the cows that are all waiting around us. I'm about to close. Let's go back to the first question that I asked. Does mental health have any bearing on our spirituality? Oh, yes, it does. But then that leads us to the next important question. As Adventist Christians, what should we do when we have a brother or a sister that is depressed? And what if we get depressed? How do we want us to be treated by others? First of all, it might be insensitive to say to our brother or sister that you are depressed because you lack faith. Furthermore, due to the complicated nature and neurobiology of depression, it is very simplistic to say that depression could be cured by mere prayers. Of course, prayer works, but along with prayer, there must be interventions that would accompany those prayers. I would argue that even God himself, to help Elijah get back on his feet, had provided some interventions. And dealing with people who are depressed does not just involve giving them medications. We also need to give them the cows that would change their lives and would make them see again the value of living. And only after these underlying issues are addressed that they would be much more sensitive and respondent to spiritual interventions and hopefully become restored, not only physically and emotionally, but also spiritually. Oh, how we need Jesus' love to deal with troublesome, depressing times. How we need his love to help us deal with the mental battles that we fight ourselves and to help those who are suffering emotionally and mentally. It is my prayer that God will bless us today as we become advocates for those who are suffering, those who are lonely, depressed, and brokenhearted. God bless.